My fiancée claimed she needed space before our wedding to clear her head. Reality check. She needed my money to fund a romantic getaway with her ex-boyfriend and his daughter. The same daughter I've been raising as my own for 3 years. While she was building sandcastles with her past, I was busy demolishing her future. Her panic call weeks later was music to my ears, but nothing compared to her reaction when she discovered what I'd filed in family court. My name is Neil Whitman. I'm 42 years old, and I run Whitman Pool Construction here in Tampa, Florida. Been at it for 15 years. Built myself a solid reputation installing custom pools for folks with more money than sense. Good work, fair prices, and I show up when I say I will. That's how I built my business from nothing but a pickup truck and a dream. Casey Whitaker walked into my life 3 years ago when I was installing an infinity pool at her neighbor's place. She was standing at the fence line with this little girl on her hip, both of them watching me work like I was performing surgery instead of running PVC pipe. The kid had these big brown eyes and kept waving at me every time I looked up. "Mama, why is that man digging such a big hole?" the little girl asked. Casey laughed, and I swear that sound made me forget every measurement I'd taken that morning. "He's making the Hendersons a swimming pool, Ivy," Casey told her daughter. Then she looked at me. "Sorry, we don't mean to stare. It's just fascinating to watch." I wiped my hands on my work shirt and walked over to the fence. "No problem at all. I'm Neil Whitman." "Casey Whitaker," she said, shifting little Ivy to her other hip. "And this curious little monkey is my daughter." That's how it started. Simple as that. By the end of the week, I was having coffee on her back porch every morning before heading to the job site. Ivy would sit between us, drawing pictures of pools and fish while Casey and I talked about everything and nothing. Casey was 37, worked as a marketing coordinator for a medical device company downtown. Smart as a whip, funny, and gorgeous in that natural way that doesn't need makeup to turn heads. More importantly, she was a good mother. Ivy wasn't mine biologically, but watching Casey with her daughter told me everything I needed to know about the woman's character. Or so I thought. The thing about Ivy's father was always a sore subject. Casey said he'd walked out when Ivy was 2, claimed he wasn't ready for the responsibility, said his name was Trent, and that he lived somewhere up in Georgia now. She never wanted to talk about him much, and I respected that. Figured if a man could walk away from a kid like Ivy, it wasn't worth the breath it took to discuss him. I felt hard for both of them. Started thinking about expanding the house, maybe putting in a pool for Ivy to learn to swim in. The kid called me Mr. Neil at first, but after about 6 months, it became just Neil, and then one day she slipped and called me Daddy Neil. Casey got all flustered and started to correct her, but I told her it was fine. More than fine, actually. We got engaged last Christmas. I proposed right there in her living room with Ivy helping me hide the ring in her toy box. The kid was so excited she could barely contain herself, jumping up and down while I got down on one knee. "Will you marry us, Mama?" Ivy had asked, making us both laugh through our tears. Casey said yes, and we started planning a small wedding for this summer. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends at the community center by the lake. Ivy was going to be our flower girl, and my parents were already talking about how proud they were to finally have a granddaughter. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but I was too busy being grateful to question it. The wedding was set for June 15th, just 2 months away. The venue was booked, the catering ordered, and I'd even special ordered Casey's ring from a jeweler in Ybor City. We'd been living together for 8 months by then, splitting expenses down the middle like a real partnership. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. But sometimes when you're building something solid, you forget to check if the foundation underneath is as strong as you think it is. It was a Tuesday evening in late April when Casey dropped the bombshell that should have sent me running for the hills. I was in the garage organizing my tools after a long day, installing a spa attachment for the Richardsons when she appeared in the doorway, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Neil, we need to talk," Casey said, her voice carrying that tone women use when they're about to rearrange your entire world. I set down my pipe wrench and gave her my full attention. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" She walked over and leaned against my workbench, fidgeting with her engagement ring. "I've been thinking about everything lately. The wedding, work, us. It's all happening so fast, and I'm feeling overwhelmed." The alarm bells in my head started ringing, but I kept my voice steady. "Okay, what do we do to help with that?" "I think I need some space," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Just for a few weeks. Time to clear my head and make sure I'm making the right decisions. I felt like someone had sucker punched me, but I'd learned long ago that reacting with emotion usually made things worse. Space meaning what, exactly? Casey finally looked at me. I need to get away for a while. Maybe visit my college friend Miranda in Savannah. Just breathe, you know? Wedding planning has me so stressed I can barely think straight. What about Ivy? I asked because that little girl was my biggest concern in all this. She'll stay with my mom, Casey said quickly. It's better if she has stability while I figure things out. Something fell off about the whole conversation, but Casey seemed genuinely stressed. Dark circles under her eyes. That nervous energy she got when work was particularly demanding. Maybe she really did need a break. How long are we talking? I asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I just need to know that when I walk down that aisle, I'm doing it for the right reasons. I walked over and pulled her into my arms. She felt tense like a guitar string wound too tight. If that's what you need, then take it, I told her. I love you enough to wait. She relaxed against me then, and I felt her shoulders shake like she was crying. Thank you for understanding, she whispered. I promise this will make us stronger. Famous last words, as it turned out. Casey left 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a promise to call when she was ready. She kissed me goodbye at the front door, hugged Ivy tight, and told us both she'd be back soon. I watched her taillights disappear down the street and tried to ignore the feeling that I was watching more than just her car drive away. The first week without Casey crawled by like a wounded animal. I threw myself into work, taking on 3 new pool installations that I probably should have spread out over a month. Physical labor has always been my way of dealing with stress, and Lord knows I had plenty of that. Every evening, I'd pick up Ivy from Casey's mother, Helen, and we'd head back to the house for dinner. The kid kept asking when Mama was coming home, and I kept giving her the same answer. Soon, sweetheart. Mama just needs some time to think. Helen wasn't buying it, though. She'd been Casey's mother for 37 years and could read her daughter like a blueprint. Something's not right about this whole thing, Helen told me on Friday when I came to pick up Ivy. Casey's never been one to run from problems. She faces them head on. I helped Ivy gather her coloring books while thinking about Helen's words. She was right. Casey had always been decisive, practical. When her car broke down last year, she researched replacements for 2 days and bought one. When Ivy needed a new pediatrician, Casey interviewed 3 doctors and made a choice. This whole, I need space to think routine didn't fit the woman I'd fallen in love with. Maybe wedding stress affects people differently, I said, but even I didn't believe it. That night, after Ivy was asleep, I found myself staring at my phone. Casey had said she'd call when she was ready, but the silence was eating at me. A quick text wouldn't hurt, right? Just to make sure she was safe. I typed and deleted a dozen messages before finally putting the phone down. She'd asked for space, and I was going to respect that, even if it was killing me. By the second week, I'd establish a routine. Work until 6, pick up Ivy, dinner, bath time, stories, then sit on the back porch with a beer wondering what the hell was happening to my life. The wedding was still 6 weeks away, and everything we'd planned was still in motion. The venue, the catering, the flowers, all of it waiting for a bride who might not be coming back. It was during one of those porch sessions that I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what was really going on in Savannah. Not because I didn't trust Casey, but because I needed to know if I was waiting for someone who was already gone. I didn't set out to become a detective, but sometimes life forces you into roles you never wanted. It was Tuesday of the second week when I made the call that shattered my world into a million pieces. Miranda Lawson was easy enough to find online. Casey had mentioned her college friend enough times that I remembered her last name, and a simple Facebook search brought up her profile. One phone call to her real estate office in Savannah, and I had her on the line. Hi, Miranda. This is Neil Whitman, Casey Whitaker's fiancé, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. I hope I'm not bothering you. Oh, Neil. Casey's told me so much about you, Miranda said warmly. How can I help you? I wanted to surprise Casey with something while she's visiting you, but I realized I don't have your address. Could you help me out? There was a pause that lasted about 3 heartbeats too long. I'm sorry, Neil, but I think there's been some confusion, Miranda said carefully. Casey isn't here. I haven't seen her since my wedding 2 years ago. The phone felt heavy in my hand. Are you sure? She said she was coming to visit you for a couple weeks. I'm positive, Miranda said, and I could hear the concern in her voice. Neil, is everything okay? I hung up without answering because I didn't know what to say. Casey had lied to me, flat out lied about where she was going and who she was seeing. The woman I'd planned to marry in 6 weeks had disappeared with a story that fell apart with one phone call. That's when I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator. Jake Morrison was a former cop who specialized in marital cases, and he came highly recommended by my lawyer. 24 hours and $500 later, he called me with information that felt like a gut punch. Your fiancée is in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Jake said over the phone. She's staying at the Ocean Reef Resort with a man named Trent Shepard. They checked in together 3 days after she left Tampa. Trent Shepard, Ivy's biological father. The man who'd supposedly walked out on his daughter and disappeared to Georgia. The man Casey claimed she never wanted to see again. Are you certain it's them? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Sent you photos to your email, Jake said. I'm sorry, Neil. This isn't the kind of news I like delivering. I opened the email on my phone, and there they were. Casey and a tall, dark-haired man walking hand in hand on the beach. Casey laughing at something he was saying. Casey in his arms as waves crashed around their feet. Casey kissing the father of her child while I was home taking care of that same child. I canceled my wedding while my future wife was vacationing with her ex-boyfriend. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the betrayal cut too deep for bitter laughter. I sat in my truck outside the job site for an hour, staring at those photos and feeling something inside me die. Not the part that loved Casey. That would take longer to kill. But the part that trusted blindly, that believed in fairy tale endings, that thought love was enough to overcome anything. That part was gone forever. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for Casey to realize her vacation in paradise had turned into a nightmare. Her call came on a Tuesday evening while I was grilling burgers for Ivy and myself, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in the chaos she'd left behind. When her number flashed on my phone, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what excuse she'd come up with for lying to my face. Neil, Casey's voice was shaky, uncertain. I know you're probably angry, but I need to talk to you. I flipped the burgers and kept my voice level. Go ahead. I'm listening. I made a mistake, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. A huge mistake. I was confused and scared, and I let Trent convince me that we could try again for Ivy's sake. But it's not working, Neil. It was never going to work. I watched Ivy through the kitchen window, playing on her swing set. The swing set I'd installed last summer because I wanted her to have the childhood I never had. So you lied to me, I said. Told me you were visiting Miranda when you were really running off with your ex. Casey was quiet for a long moment. How did you find out? I called Miranda to send you flowers, I said, which wasn't entirely true, but close enough. Imagine my surprise when she told me you weren't there. Neil, please let me come home. We can work through this. I love you, and Ivy needs you. She asks about you every day. That last part hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course Ivy was asking about me. I'd been the closest thing to a father she'd had for 3 years. Here's the thing, Casey, I said, turning off the grill. While you were playing house with Trent in Myrtle Beach, I canceled our wedding. The venue, the catering, the flowers, all of it. Gone. The gasp on the other end of the line was audible. You can't be serious. Dead serious. You wanted space to figure things out. Well, I figured things out too. I figured out that I don't want to marry someone who runs to her ex the moment things get complicated. But what about Ivy? Casey's voice broke. What about everything we built together? I looked at the house we'd shared, the yard where Ivy played, the life I'd thought we were building brick by brick. You should have thought about that before you got on a plane with another man, I said. You made your choice, Casey. Now you get to live with it. Neil, please. I hung up and blocked her number. Then I walked outside and told Ivy her burgers were ready, forcing a smile I didn't feel. The kid deserved better than watching the adults in her life fall apart. But what Casey didn't know was that I'd already started the process of protecting myself legally. My lawyer had advised me to document everything, and I had photos, phone records, and witness statements that painted a clear picture of abandonment and infidelity. Her call 3 weeks later had surprised me, but not in the way she'd hoped. Casey showed up at my front door the next morning, looking like she'd been through a blender. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing clothes that looked like she'd slept in them. This wasn't the polished, confident woman who'd walked out of my life 3 weeks ago. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What do you want, Casey?" "I want to talk to you properly," she said, glancing over my shoulder toward the living room. "Can I come in? Please." "No," I said simply. "You can say whatever you need to say from there." Her face crumbled a little. "Neil, I know I messed up, but Trent promised me things would be different, that he'd changed. I thought maybe Ivy deserved a chance to have her real father in her life. And how did that work out for you?" I asked, crossing my arms. Casey's eyes filled with tears. "He hasn't changed. He's still the same selfish man who walked out on us 3 years ago. The moment things got real, the moment Ivy started asking when she could come home, he panicked. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility." I felt a flicker of satisfaction that I immediately pushed down. This wasn't about being right. This was about protecting myself and, more importantly, protecting Ivy. "So now you want to come back," I said. "Just like that." "I never stopped loving you," Casey said desperately. "I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can reschedule the wedding, start over." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. "See this? It's a text from my lawyer. Trent filed for custody of Ivy yesterday. Seems like he wants his daughter back now that his reconciliation with you fell through." The color drained from Casey's face. "He can't do that. He gave up his rights when he left." "Actually, he didn't," I said, watching her world crumble in real time. "He just wasn't paying child support. But now he's got a steady job in Atlanta, and he's claiming you're an unfit mother who abandoned her child to chase men." Casey grabbed the doorframe for support. "That's not true, isn't it?" I asked. "You left Ivy with your mother for 3 weeks while you played vacation with your ex. How do you think that's going to look to a family court judge?" The tears were flowing freely now. "Neil, please. I need your help. Ivy needs you." That's when I played my ace card. The thing my lawyer had suggested that made my stomach turn, but felt like the only way to protect the little girl I come to love as my own daughter. "I've already filed paperwork with the court," I said quietly, "requesting emergency custody of Ivy based on abandonment and endangerment of a minor." Casey's knees buckled. "You can't take my daughter away from me." "I'm not taking her away," I said. "I'm protecting her from parents who use her as a pawn in their games. You left her, Casey. You chose Trent over both of us. Now you get to face the consequences." I stepped back inside and started to close the door, but Casey put her hand against it. "This isn't over," she said, her voice hard now. "You're not her father, Neil. You're just some man I dated." I looked her straight in the eye. "That some man has been paying for her clothes, her food, her medical insurance, and her daycare for the last 18 months. But don't worry. You'll get a chance to explain to the judge why that doesn't matter." This time I closed the door and locked it, leaving Casey standing on my porch with the pieces of her shattered life scattered around her feet. The phone call from my mother came at 6 in the morning, 3 days after my confrontation with Casey. Mom had never been one to beat around the bush, but the edge in her voice told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Neil Joseph Whitman," she said, using my full name like I was 10 years old again. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" I sat up in bed, instantly awake. "Good morning to you too, Mom. Don't you sass me, young man. Your father and I just got off the phone with Helen, and she told us everything. You're trying to take that sweet little girl away from her mother." I rubbed my eyes and tried to find the words to explain something I wasn't sure my parents would understand. They'd been married for 45 years and thought every relationship problem could be solved with communication and compromise. "Mom, Casey abandoned Ivy to run off with her ex-boyfriend," I said. "She lied to my face and left her daughter with her grandmother for 3 weeks while she played house with another man." "People make mistakes, Neil," Mom said, her voice softening slightly. "That doesn't mean you tear a family apart." "She tore the family apart when she got on that plane," I said, getting out of bed and walking to the kitchen. "I'm just trying to protect Ivy from parents who treat her like a possession instead of a person." Dad got on the phone then, his voice gruff with disappointment. "Son, we raised you better than this. You don't use a child as a weapon against her mother." That hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. "Is that what you think I'm doing? What else are we supposed to think?" Dad asked. "You file for custody the day after Casey comes home? Seems like revenge to me." I poured myself a cup of coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. My parents had always been my moral compass, and hearing them question my actions made me doubt everything. "Let me ask you something," I said finally. "If I was Ivy's biological father, and Casey did exactly what she did, What would you tell me then? There was silence on the other end of the line. You tell me to fight for my daughter, I continued. You tell me that blood doesn't make a father, consistency does. Well, I've been consistent for 3 years. I've been the one at her school plays, her doctor appointments, her bedtime stories. Casey walked away from that, not me. But you're not her father, Mom said quietly. No, I'm not, I agreed. But I'm the only father she's known since she was 2 years old. And right now, I'm the only adult in this situation who's putting her needs first. I hung up feeling more alone than I had since Casey left. But an hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was my brother Jake. Mom called me. He said without preamble. Told me what's happening. Let me guess, you think I'm being vindictive too? Actually, Jake said, I think you're doing exactly what I'd do if someone messed with my kids. Mom and Dad, they see the world through rose-colored glasses sometimes. But you and me, we know what it's like when people don't keep their promises. Jake was talking about our older sister, who'd run off when we were teenagers and left our parents heartbroken for years. You think I'm doing the right thing? I asked. I think you're doing the hard thing, Jake said. And sometimes that's the same thing. My lawyer, Richard Crane, was the kind of man who wore $1,000 suits and charged accordingly. But when it came to protecting Ivy, money was no object. His office overlooked Tampa Bay, and I could see the construction cranes building new condos for rich folks while I fought to keep the most important person in my life. We need to discuss strategy, Richard said, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. The court date is set for next month, and we need to be prepared for anything Casey's attorney might throw at us. I leaned forward in the leather chair. What do you mean? She's going to paint you as a vindictive ex-boyfriend who's using the child to get back at her, Richard said matter-of-factly. Her lawyer will argue that you have no legal standing because you're not the biological father, and that your sudden interest in custody is purely punitive. And how do we counter that? Richard smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. We use every advantage we have. You own a successful business, you have a stable home, and you can prove 3 years of financial support. More importantly, we can demonstrate a pattern of abandonment on Casey's part. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've been doing some research on Trent Shepard. Turns out this isn't the first time he's tried to play happy family and then backed out. He has a son in Alabama he hasn't seen in 5 years and a daughter in North Carolina he owes $30,000 in back child support to. I felt a flicker of satisfaction. That's useful. It gets better, Richard continued. I also discovered that Casey used money from your joint wedding account to pay for her little vacation. That's technically theft of shared assets. The joint account. We've been saving for our honeymoon, putting away $500 a month for the past year. I noticed the balance was lower than expected, but hadn't questioned it. How much did she take? I asked. $3,800. The exact amount she and Trent spent at the resort. I sat back in my chair, feeling the last of my sympathy for Casey evaporate. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd stolen from us financially to fund her affair. But here's the real advantage we have, Richard said, pulling out another document. I had my investigator do some digging on Casey's employment situation. Turns out she was fired from her job 2 weeks before she asked for space. She's been lying about that too. The hits just kept coming. Fired for what? Inappropriate use of company resources. Seems she was using company time and equipment to plan her reunion with Trent. Her boss found personal emails and travel bookings on her work computer. I looked out the window at the bay, watching boats navigate the choppy waters. That's what this felt like, trying to steer through a storm while everything I thought I knew about Casey got swept away. So, she's unemployed, she stole money to fund an affair, and she abandoned her child, I said. How does that look to a family court judge? Like a pattern of poor decision-making and unstable behavior, Richard said. Add in the fact that you've been the primary provider and caretaker for the past 18 months, and we have a strong case. Richard leaned back in his chair. Neil, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you doing this because you love Ivy, or because you want to hurt Casey? I thought about that little girl who called me Daddy, who ran to me when she had nightmares, who drew pictures of our family with 3 stick figures under a smiling sun. Both, I said honestly. But if I have to choose, Ivy comes first. She always has. Richard nodded approvingly. Good, because that's exactly what we're going to tell the judge. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but the weight of what was happening made it feel enormous. Casey sat across the aisle with her lawyer, looking pale and defeated. She tried to clean herself up for court, but 3 months of poor decisions had taken their toll. Judge Patricia Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been handling family cases for 20 years. She listened to both sides with the patience of someone who'd heard every excuse in the book. Casey's lawyer tried his best, painting me as a vindictive ex-boyfriend using the child as a weapon. But when Richard presented our evidence, the financial records, the employment termination, the theft from our joint account, the pattern of abandonment, the judge's expression grew increasingly stern. "Ms. Whitaker," Judge Morrison said, "you took money from a shared account to fund a vacation with another man while leaving your daughter in someone else's care. Can you explain how this serves your child's best interests?" Casey's voice was barely audible. "I thought I was doing what was best for Ivy. I thought she deserved to know her biological father. By lying to the man who had been caring for her for 3 years," the judge asked. "By abandoning your responsibilities to pursue a relationship with a man who has a documented history of abandoning his own children." The final blow came when Helen, Casey's own mother, testified on my behalf. "Your Honor," Helen said, tears in her eyes, "Neil has been more of a father to Ivy than anyone else in her life. When Casey left, Ivy cried for him every night. She asked for her daddy Neil, not for her mother or her biological father." The judge's decision was swift and decisive. Temporary custody to me, with supervised visitation for Casey pending completion of parenting classes and steady employment. Trent's bid for custody was dismissed entirely. Outside the courthouse, Casey approached me one last time. "I hope you're happy," she said bitterly. "I'm not happy about any of this," I replied, "but I'm at peace with it. Ivy deserves stability, and I'm going to make sure she gets it." 3 months later, the temporary custody became permanent. Casey had completed her classes and found a job, but the supervised visits revealed what I'd suspected all along. Ivy was polite but distant with her mother. The bond had been broken, not by me, but by Casey's choices. As for Trent, he'd already moved on to his next adventure, leaving behind another child he couldn't commit to raising. 2 years have passed since that day in court, and life has settled into a rhythm I never expected but couldn't imagine changing. Ivy is 7 now, excelling in 2nd grade and taking swimming lessons in the pool I built in our backyard. Our backyard, because this house truly belongs to both of us now. The adoption papers were finalized 6 months ago. Casey, faced with mounting legal bills and the reality of her situation, agreed to terminate her parental rights in exchange for me dropping the theft charges. It wasn't vindictive. It was practical. Ivy needed permanence, not the constant uncertainty of custody battles. "Daddy Neil," Ivy said last week while we were working in the garden, "why did Mama Casey go away?" It's a question she asks occasionally, usually when she's processing something at school about families. I've learned to answer honestly, but age-appropriately. "Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love," I told her. "Your first mama chose to leave, but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means she wasn't ready to be the parent you deserved. But you were ready," she said, not really a question. "I was ready the moment I met you," I said, pulling her into a hug. My parents have fully embraced their role as Ivy's grandparents. Dad built her a treehouse last summer, and Mom takes her shopping for school clothes and teaches her to bake cookies. She's their granddaughter in every way that matters. I've started dating again, carefully, slowly, always with Ivy's well-being as my top priority. There's a woman named Sarah who owns the bookstore downtown. She's patient, kind, and understands that any relationship with me comes with a built-in daughter who's been through enough instability for one lifetime. Casey sends birthday cards now, usually with a generic message and her new address. She remarried last year to a man from Jacksonville and moved away. Ivy reads the cards politely and puts them in a box in her closet. She doesn't ask to visit or call, and I don't push it. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel guilty about how completely I won. But then I watch Ivy laughing with her friends at a pool party, or helping me estimate materials for a job, or reading stories to the neighbor's dog, and I know I made the right choice. She calls me Dad now, not Daddy Neil. It happened gradually, naturally, the way all the best changes do. And when people ask if she's mine, I don't hesitate anymore. Yes, I tell them. She's mine. Because love isn't about biology. It's about showing up every single day and choosing to be the parent a child needs. I chose Ivy, and eventually, she chose me back. That's all the victory I ever needed.